You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Borhane Blili-Hamelin, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Borhane, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm really happy to have you on the show today. And, we've been speaking for months, having a chat every now and then. And I'm really excited that we finally made it to this episode.
I'm so excited to be here. I've really enjoyed every conversation with you, and it's going to be fun to share that with folks.
Great. So, Borhane, you are I'm just going to call you Bo, I think, if I don't mix it up around,
That works.
That works great. So you're a PhD in philosophy, and you're working with AI today, or AI risk, as I understand. I simply have to ask one thing first. What is the biggest philosophical challenge that you see with the current crop of AI models?
So I'm struggling with your question. This is a challenging question for me, for two reasons. The first one is, as a philosopher, and so I have a PhD in philosophy. I'm not in a philosophy department anymore. I don't do traditional philosophy work anymore. But as a philosopher, one of the constant things for me was being interested in questions that aren't exclusive to philosophers. So this thing of like questions that are like delineated in like philosophers are interested in this, but not other folks, and there are specialty, was like always the least interesting questions for me. So there's a type of answer that would come from folks who are specifically interested in like, let's carve out questions that are like really well suited for philosophers and no one else, that would like be really good fit for your prompt, but those just don't happen to be the questions I'm curious about. And so the questions that I go for are instead questions that have to do with the fact that we're animals with very, very limited powers. We can know the world around us, we can interact with things around us, but fundamentally we have very limited powers. There's very little we know, there's very little we can do, and somehow we can challenge our own limitations. And that tension, the fact that we have very limited knowledge but we can also challenge our limitations, is where my interests lie. And with AI, I would say, I mean, the entire space for me feels like it has that feature. It's a space where we're building tools. We're building tools that we don't understand fully, but also we're trying to roll out, as at the same time as we're building tools, controls that enable us to, you know, get the tools to do what we want. And that tension between like rolling out tools that are poorly understood but that are also worth trying to build, with trying to catch up with the things that are needed for those things to do what think to have desirable outcomes for different groups. Like that tension is really interesting to me, and trying to play catch up with tools that we're rolling out is also interesting to me. And that probably doesn't sound like the answer you expected, but
No,
I'm
but I
curious to
think
hear what you had in mind
no,
with this question.
because what I had in mind was, a purely phenomenological discussion here,
Yep.
epistemological something. What are we actually experiencing here when we're
Yep.
looking at this AI thing? The whole moment that people were in November 22 suddenly chatting with a bot, right? That
Yep.
must have been quite interesting from that perspective for a philosopher. I thought, you would be like,
Yep.
oh, what would Immanuel Kant say to this? I thought you would be like that, but you're not.
Nope. I'm really not. So I can play into this to some extent. So over the last couple of years, as side projects, just because it's interesting and fun, I've gotten quite interested in drawing on insights on what intelligence is, what kind of concept it is, but also how it's understood in the social sciences and limitations to how it's understood in social sciences, and drawing on insights from like grappling with the nature of intelligence for the AI space. So the first paper I did with friend Leif Hancocksley a couple of years back was looking at AI evaluation, and drawing on insights on like the nature of intelligence, and that led us to do some work on AGI. Again, the same perspective. I don't know much about AGI, but having worked on like this style of like, let's draw on social science on intelligence to ask questions about evaluation, felt like a really good entry door into this big, this other topic. So these questions about the nature of intelligence, specifically grappling with the to me, that's a core insight into concepts like health, intelligence, is that they're both descriptive, where like you can, specify behaviors that you're looking for when you
Mm.
say something is, intelligent, or when you say something is healthy. You can specify like like conditions you're looking for, behaviors you're looking for, um, but they're always also fundamentally about what is desirable. So they have that feature of being both, descriptive concepts and normative concepts. We call them thick evaluative concepts.
Mm.
Um, and the fact that fundamentally, both like concepts like health and intelligence are always about what is desirable, and then the question is what is desirable to whom, um, makes everything else about investigating, you know, intelligence in its different forms, have that feature of turning on policy decisions. What is desirable? What is desirable to whom? And everything we do with concepts like this is always informed in different ways by these policy decisions about what is desirable to whom. And that is deeply interesting to me. And that is definitely, these are some of the questions that I think, like every new form of machine intelligence raises. Yeah.
But that's also, I think, actually, if I understand some of my own philosophy correctly, remember it correctly, there's the naturalistic fallacy of going from the descriptive state to the normative state, saying this is how it is, this is how it's supposed to be, right? And people do that all the time because it is this way, But women like to do this, yeah. So they should always do this, People do that all the
Yep.
time, right? So,
Yep.
but I think that people have the same thing. That one camp on AI is going like, "Oh, we've always done this, so we should always do this." So like
Mm-hmm.
reactionary. Then you have the other ones who are like saying that the current state or the descriptive state, to some extent, is a sci-fi state because, as Lorian Pratt said in my last episode, it's not out yet at the recording time, but it will be
Mm-hmm.
when we're out. She said that we are dealing with technology here, the only technology that has a whole Hollywood genre, right?
Right.
We don't do that with ERP, It's not like ERP doomsday movies or something like that, right? This is something we do. So we have something where people actually think that there's already a descriptive state to some extent on AI and what it will be. They always already know what it is, so it's gonna be. So there's this two opposite camps to some extent. So where's the fallacy really here, and how do you make up? How do you? What I'm actually interested in knowing is, yeah, two things. What's the fallacy then in what we're actually how we're seeing AI, and also how do you take this whole Hollywood genre distortion out of your mind when you think about intelligence right now?
Um. So the fact that there's a Hollywood genre means we're trying to imagine something.
Mm,
And there's a sense in which, I mean, I guess the fallacy for me would be more along the lines of thinking we are done imagining intelligence,
mm,
that we're done also learning about intelligence, but also like we're done imagining what it could be like. And both in humans and in machines and in other life forms, there's work on plant intelligence, for instance,
yeah.
that is very interesting. There's similarly, I think in like making claims that are like clear cut, we know what intelligence is in this domain. These machines are not intelligent. Vice versa. Like any way you slice or dice it, we know what intelligence is, and therefore we can specify exactly when we're going to have intelligent machines. All variants of claims like this, to me, don't take seriously enough the fact that what intelligence can be, given that it's an evaluative concept and it's about preferences,
So
to
that's the
some
naturalistic
extent.
fallacy, right? This is the
Yeah,
intelligence we
yeah,
understand. This is
yeah,
how it will always be, right?
yeah. What intelligence can be is something we haven't ever fully imagined and we haven't ever fully specified, because to some extent it's a matter of what is deemed desirable by different groups, especially groups in power. Um, you know, and we're never done imagining answers to questions like that. And yeah, so I guess that's where I would locate the fallacy is in the kind of diagnoses, both like critical. I see this as well in folks that are extremely critical of um, like different claims made about AI. That same fallacy of assuming the topic is straightforward and that we're done imagining what this means.
So they're those that are overdoing it is mistaken, but but also those that are underdoing the intelligence in this is definitely
Yep.
also mistaking. That's what you're saying.
Yep.
So this is intelligence. The LLMs are intelligent. Oh,
I mean, in a way, I feel like
another way of saying it: Borhane Blili-Hamelin, are LLMs intelligent?
um, I mean, I
Yes
have
or
a
no?
very yeah, I have a very underwhelming answer. I think, depending on how you think about intelligence, but yeah, so like if you think, making taking actions, making decisions based on information, different ways, that's enough for, like very, um like minimal notion of intelligence. I have no problem saying all sorts of things are intelligent. I have no problem saying plants are intelligent. I have no problem saying LLMs are intelligent. I don't think that. I mean, but that's like coming from the perspective of thinking that the bar is actually extremely low.
Okay. But okay. Now you're asking me. You're going. Now you're forcing me to ask you what is intelligence. You're also forcing me to ask you what is not intelligent. Right. This becomes almost Parmenides, old Greek stuff. This just what if you
I'm
have to
forcing you
say
to do
what it
that.
is by what it isn't, right? So what is intelligence then? Because now you're opening it up completely wide here, right?
Yeah, of course. So again, it goes back from acknowledging that intelligence is always a combination of assumptions about what is desirable with descriptions of different behaviors. So on the assumptions, I would say, I mean, that there's always some amount of variability, but like start from the behavior and thinking about behaviors that deal with information and behaviors, so like cognition, broadly speaking, behaviors that deal with information and that make decisions in light of information. Start with behavior like that.
So
um you know
DNA cells and DNA, that's intelligence. Because they're using information to replicate.
let me finish the thought. So start with behavior like that, right? Start with behavior like that, roughly, right?
Yeah.
And then ask yourself what is more or less desirable in behavior like that. So you need to specify some goals.
Hmm.
And you need to come to this like family of behaviors that like draw on information to make decisions, and then specify, this is what I want to see more of, and this
Hmm.
is what I want to see more or less of. And then you start getting into territory of where making claims about intelligence can make sense. Depending on how you specify the thing that you desire or not, then like different things will count as intelligence or not, as intelligent or not. But
My mind is flowing
yeah.
completely off topic here. I'm going intelligent design now. Is that intelligent? And is the cell intelligent because it's producing something that does it have to want to be? Does the cell want? Does the cell have to want to become a human to be an intelligent cell? I'm just whoa. And how does it know? And and is there a rhyme and reason to the whole universe? And maybe that's intelligence. Is okay, but then now it becomes a little bit another discussion, right? Doesn't it?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't know if I'm gonna go there with you. The thing about intelligent design is, I mean, I'm not gonna. Yeah, I don't know that I want to go there.
No, okay, let's not do that then.
Yeah. S-
That's
there's so
also a
many
complete. That's
assumptions
that's
to.
a rabbit hole.
Yeah,
That's a rabbit hole.
there's so many assumptions to unpack to even like even touch a topic like this. But I actually think the claims are about a completely different domain than what we were just
But
talking
it's just
about.
because you said that it has to
Um,
have some kind of intention, right? That meant it seemed like a design thing.
No,
It
I
had
didn't
to.
say there has to be an intention. I said that in specifying what counts as intelligent, you need to specify something desirable that you want to see more or less of, right?
Mm,
So, um, for instance, efficiency. That's an example thing you could care about, right? So, like,
mm,
how efficient are you in, drawing on information to make decisions, or, how good a job do you do at drawing on information in a way that allows you to make decisions that meet your goals? I mean, these are example things that you can
yeah, yeah.
start specifying to talk about intelligence.
So it's a
There's many
100%
many
social
more.
construct that way, right? You're saying you're not
Yeah,
making something
yeah.
that's objectively true, but something that changes according to the context you want to use it in. That's why the LLMs are intelligent if they improve efficiency, if that's the thing you want to aim at with.
Yeah, to some extent social construct. Yeah, yeah.
Good. I asked you
Yeah.
for a yes or no answer, but you did it okay.
I don't do yes or no answers.
No. I love that. I love you're a philosopher. Of course you don't. So what mirror do you think that really AI puts in front of us as humanity?
I mean, one way to think about it is going back to what we think of what of our abilities, but also of what tools can do. Um, and one mirror is certainly challenging the limitations of our assumptions about what tools can do. I think automation, and it's not specific to AI, but across the board, definitely puts an enormous mirror on conceptions of what is valuable in human life that put a lot of emphasis on work. And I think that
Mm.
in um, many societies, and that certainly is the case in many Western societies, the place of work in conceiving of what makes human life worth living, but also like how we think
Yeah.
of what is desirable in people, what is desirable in
Yeah, that
ourselves.
discussion is definitely started, right?
Yeah, and that's a feature of automation to me, not of AI. But AI
Is
is
that
bringing
because we're
automation
discussing
into
our
new
own
domains. So
intelligence? Is it because we're discussing our own intelligence if we are actually desirable in what we're doing? Is that what we're doing?
the, to some extent, but I also just think like no, it's more specific to work. So like labor, making
Mm.
like doing things that are socially productive and getting paid for it. That's kind of like notion of work.
Mm.
And so it doesn't matter how you describe it. I don't associate the like specific challenge that automation raises for conceptions of you know um what is desirable in humans having to do it. Hey, I'm a productive member of society and I earn my living and I
Mm.
can support my family and so on and so forth. And I also do work that is meaningful to me in all of those assumption. So to me, automation, historically, disrupts very large parts of the workforce,
Yeah.
and undermines the assumption that the work and labor of very large parts of the workforce is desirable and valuable and valued. And any conception of ourselves that places such a high emphasis on work will get challenged
Yeah.
when specific forms of work get displaced.
The
Yeah.
whole meaning discussion, right? If there's meaning, if we're going to just do more pseudo work and lose meaning to some extent, right? In what we do, they become estranged from. We already have that, right? When you buy something in the supermarket, you're totally estranged from whatever where it comes from and who made it, right? So this is going to accelerate. That's your point, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. Okay, good. You're thinking. I love that you're always thinking about your answers. Yeah, and you actually said yes to me here. No, but so let's get a little bit away from the philosophy. Currently you work on identifying AI risks, if I'm not incorrect in that, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
what most enterprises really want to hear about right now is AI innovation. How do we balance those two things? And just explain what you're actually doing when you're working on AI risk. What does that mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So I work on AI risk from a few different perspectives. So I do a combination of research and just very applied work. Helping organizations um, manage AI risk. These days I do this through auditing. So I work with an AI auditing consultancy. I'm also interested in internal risk management efforts. So like what capacity building do organizations do internally to do things like AI evaluation and figure out, hey, I have this product idea, but what needs to be the case for me to make informed decisions about whether the product is performing as intended, but also whether the product is performing in ways that are desirable for different groups, like these kinds of questions. Um, Same with security risks, and so yeah, and so like again, like I do this work both as a consultant, but also as a researcher. Um, you're asking about the challenge of navigating like how interested organizations are in innovation and the risk side. There's a way in which to me, and just like go back to it, like a pure business perspective, you're like thinking about, doing $5 million investment, you know, in specific area around a specific, like product idea. You're hiring, you're building a team, and you're gonna, like over the course of, like specified a time frame, say the next year, you're going to like hopefully deliver something, and you have this very big investment. You know, you're already dealing with risk in making your decisions. Like I don't understand this mindset that businesses aren't always factoring risk in their decisions,
Mm.
because to me, making business investment is always about risk. And it's about risk tolerance, and it's about, what is your expected return on an investment, and what is your risk appetite in making that investment. And that is something that businesses deal with all the time. So I think, like, from like a pure, like, I'm trying to make money here, like capitalist perspective, this false dichotomy between innovation and risk is really unhelpful. It's a just misconception of how, blatantly self-interested, investment
Okay,
work.
so
There
you so
is
you
there
sort of
is a
no,
notion of
yeah,
risk there,
you're
right?
connecting the two, right? You're saying they are
Yeah.
completely connected, but you're still working only on the one side of them.
Um, well, that's because I'm playing to my strengths to some extent. It's not because I don't think both sides are important, but I actually know I want to say, what I described is like decision making in light of what you want and what is desirable and what
Mm.
different groups want. So like, like what you want as an organization, what you expect your customers might want, what you expect parties that will have strong opinions about what you do, and that might have an impact on the world. So what you expect about what different stakeholders will think of what you do, including regulators, including all sorts of impacted communities, including civil society organizations. Like, you are always making decisions as a business that needs to take into account um, what might happen, and you have uncertainty, right? What might happen. So you start from what you consider desirable and what different parties consider desirable. What are your goals? And you think through um, the uncertainty you have around achieving your goals, but also around what kind of unexpected, undesirable
Yeah,
consequences
yeah,
might
of
might
course.
might occur as a result of trying to achieve your goal. And whenever you make a business decision, you're like dealing with preferences, you're dealing with uncertainty. And to me, AI risk management work is just part of that process of making decisions about achieving goals, but then also the question of, like, whose goals, in a context where organizations are making decisions that affect different stakeholders. And you're dealing with uncertainty, and it's about making better decisions under uncertainty. And to me, that is not at odds with being interested in innovation. Far from it. To me, effective risk management work needs to grapple with, why is the product being designed or developed desirable, right?
Mm.
Why would you even want this, and who might want this? And if you're not grappling with the question of why this is desirable, um, you're not doing work that is fully and well informed by an organization's policies and priorities. And
Mm.
therefore you risk doing ineffective risk management work. Like, risk management work needs to be informed by the kind of decisions that go into making products that are successful.
Mm.
um, and I don't consider those things to be at odds at all, actually. um, in fact, and this is something where I don't know, like, you might have feelings about this. The ISO risk management standard, I think, is 31,000, um, goes so far as to define risk in a way that is neutral on, like, whether the consequences are positive or negative. So it's like, from memory, it's something like, like risk is uncertainty about yeah, I forget exactly how it's defined. But it doesn't make that assumption that risk is about uncertainty around undesirable outcomes. It's instead outcomes that are positive, negative, neutral. So long as
Mm.
you have uncertainty around achieving your objectives, you're talking about risk. That's encoded in a risk management standard from ISO. Um, you know, you might have thoughts on whether that's an effective approach to thinking about risk management and risk assessments, to like go so far as to define risk in a way that includes the kind of considerations that go into
No, but
specifying whether
it's a
whether
good enough
something's a good product, right?
definition, right?
Um,
Because the good things can also be a bad thing if it goes too big a scale. Things are always, not just very few things are either or, right?
yeah, yeah. And so in a sense, like, so this starting point, right? Like, so like organizations care about innovation, they don't care about risk. Is, to me, it's a false dichotomy as a starting
Okay,
point.
but do you
The
know why
flip
I'm
side of
asked
this,
that?
the flip side, yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah,
No, but the reason I asked it is because there's a whole thing with risk and ethics. They sort of get bundled into a slightly naysayer department of the current AI
yes,
market, and then you have the other ones
yes,
going, "Yay!" and we just need the use cases and blah. So it
yeah,
seems like if you go to a conference, if you're invited to a conference,
yeah,
right, you'll be invited to the naysayer conference. Bo. I don't know. Do you get what I'm trying to get at here, right?
yeah. I do, and I would say,
And you're trying to battle that. I get that as well.
yeah, I would say what you're describing, and so like a related question is whether, ethics, risk management, security as well. It's not just ethics, safety. Are these all cost centers, right? Like that framing.
Copyrights. Oh, so boring in the.
Yeah. So are they all cost centers for
Mm,
organizations? There's there's definitely like questions about how do you structure a business and how do you fold, things that could be put in a separate risk management function into your operations. There's questions about organizational structure there, um, you know, but there's I think what you're raising is, in a way, like there's a more fundamental component to this, which is, um, inviting people to think about how things can go wrong. Um, that's an emotional issue, and a lot of people are extremely reluctant in a space that has so much hype to take a pause and, like, think about what can go wrong, right? And there's something that is just like emotionally like counter current
yeah.
to, wanting folks in a moment where there's so much hype, where folks just want to go go go, like move forward, asking folks to take a pause, asking folks to, interrogate their assumptions, but also think through, like, unintended consequences. Um, always risks running counter to, I mean, there's something emotionally dissonant to like saying, "Hey, like I want to build this, but wait, take a pause," right? And there's a sense in which,
But people have
um,
those. You're right. You're absolutely right. People have a lot of these feelings that it doesn't do what people told me on LinkedIn it would do for me,
yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
I would get Microsoft promised me I'd get more productive, but I still wake up a bad person in the morning. I think I've said that before,
yeah,
but but people are a little bit afraid of saying that out loud because maybe there's something I'm missing, right? It becomes something
yeah,
that's almost unfalsifiably wrong with me, right?
yeah,
Because the market is clearly experiencing this, right? And all the AI companies saying, "Oh, I won't have a job in 3 years, and designers will be out of a job now, should not be hired," and all those things, right? And we still just the hype is massive, right? Because it's
yeah,
tech, it's just the tech, but it's
yeah,
not the context of where we want to use it.
yeah, absolutely. Um, there's a slightly different perspective on that tension, which might be useful here. So, like, I described it in the context of business. I think that, thinking through unintended consequences is fundamentally a problem for even just taking action.
Mm, mm.
You can drive yourself nuts, and that's a well understood problem,
Yeah,
that's been discussed for,
it's
very, very long
anxiety, isn't
time
it?
in
It's just
Western.
anxiety.
Yeah, but so like Western moral philosophy has grappled with questions like this for extremely long time, and yeah, there is a tension between taking action and taking the time to think through unintended consequences and what might go wrong. And um, there's always going to be this uncomfortable boundary whenever you're thinking of taking action between, like, when do I say stop and when do I say go, right?
Mm,
And I think of that as a problem that's central to making decisions. And when you're making decisions in high stakes context, that's even, that tension is even worse. When do you say go? When do you say stop? And when do you, um, take longer before saying go? Like, all of these decisions are always very, very challenging. But to me, they're
mm,
at the center of humans taking action in high stakes contexts.
yeah. So great answer, really, and I really love the way you're positioning those innovation and risks and making them one piece of the whole. I love that both of them. So But I always also say, sometimes that, exceptions prove the rule when we're working with things, right? And I want to know, what are the top exceptions that people or problems that people should focus on when they try to implement generative AI right now? From your perspective, what should they be most wary about all the time?
I'm curious to hear your take on this, to be honest. So when you're thinking exceptions, um,
So it can say anything, it can chat about anything, can generate anything, it will do it
yeah,
perfectly. Except it will
yeah,
also, those things, the things it doesn't do that you need to understand to make it productive, right?
yeah. So there's so many layers of generative AI to me that and again that comes from like like the risk management side that I think are challenging. So I think evaluation, just like
Mm.
you know the work of specifying what is the desirable or undesirable behavior, and then how do we gather evidence of desirable or
Yeah.
undesirable behavior.
Yeah, that links
um
so much to what you just said also before.
yeah, and that work for generative AI turns out to be enormously difficult.
Yeah.
Um, and there's an extra layer of challenge that comes from the fact, and that's the thing that's not, I wish was discussed a little bit more with generative AI, which is I think of foundation models as in part a business idea. So it's a foundation model is the term coined by Stanford to describe very large models that can be customized for different for different uses. Another way to describe them is general purpose models. But the specific concept of foundation model has this supply chain idea, which is that you build an extremely expensive, very large model, and then you customize it. That's a supply chain idea. To me, that's a business idea. Um, I mean, I would sure that's a specific. That's a I guess that's a contestable claim, but I like to think of the fundamental idea as a business one. Um, a related way to think about this is foundation model to me is the attempt to build the equivalent of a platform, but at the model level itself. Instead of thinking of platforms in the AI space as either like cloud providers or maybe as a marketplace for like different models, it's really thinking of what could it look like to have models that can themselves perform different roles for different end users, and then have the model itself be in a similar position in the supply chain as a platformer, where like you go to the platformer and you get out what you want, and that will be different from what other organizations or individuals going to the platform will be
Mm.
looking for. So like really crass language, like what is it like to build models that can play a little bit of similar role to Netflix, where like you want to watch something, you go to the provider, you find what you need. You want to be doing things with automation. You want to be doing things with data. You go to the platform and you get and you get what you need. And to me, a big part of what's happening with generative AI is that we're dealing with a family of models that have that feature of um, being things you can build once, but then that customers can come to with like very very different needs, and that also raises challenges from an evaluation perspective. There's so many challenges that come with this. First layer of this is if you're like um, in the business of building those models, how do you evaluate for the enormous range of potential use cases that people might come to you for and want
Mm.
um, to deploy the model in. And so like this like
But they
how
don't
do you
even just think about
anticipate?
that. They don't
Yeah,
even discuss, the desirables. They don't even know the whys behind the models. They just,
who doesn't know what's
those the training the models, right? They don't even know why. What they just make a big model, right? Just a humongously big model that you can use for anything. Hello, goodbye.
I honestly from so doing research on this space at this point I feel like the organizations that are best informed about the evaluation challenges and doing the best work, unfortunately, often tend to be the one that are building the models. I actually
Mm.
think those organizations tend to take very very seriously the evaluation challenges, more so than people expect. Um, That said, you're right. There are challenges with knowing what happens, in the deployment context, and you just can't fully specify that, from the perspective of like building the
No, but
large
the thing is,
model.
what
Um,
are they looking for in them? What are they seeing if they can do, right? Because they don't know what I'm going to use it for necessarily. And
right. So
you
there's,
saw this
yeah,
Anthropic study where they looked at
yeah,
the features of it. Really interesting,
yeah,
like a brain. You saw that one, right?
yeah,
Uh, they looked at all the features in the brain of an LLM, right? So they started looking at what sensors does it have and how can we tweak those. And
mm.
I just but as you just said, what will people use it for in the end? It's like you just go to a platform, you get something different out of it. Everyone gets something different out of it.
Yeah, yeah, right. So you're totally right. There's a fundamental challenge. You can't know the full range of things people might do with the model. That's for sure. I would say another struggle that I'm noticing is organizations that are coming to the table with relatively small budgets and that are looking to customize a model. Um, Face a completely different kind of challenge, which is they might have in the past, built a little bit of capacity, with more like traditional machine learning model. They don't have either the organization culture or the know-how to figure out what kind of evaluation do they need to do for their use
Mm.
case. So, like an example mindset in a lot of machine learning engineering is, well, I'm thinking of building something, and so I need to look for aggregate accuracy scores. I might do a confusion matrix, and like have these like aggregate scores for like my model performance on the whole, and that's the mental model I have for evaluation. Is like I'm looking for a handful of metrics, um, and I'm looking for aggregate scores of model performance. When it comes to generative AI, this mindset to me goes against what is needed, which is decomposing the range of situations in which desirable or undesirable behaviors might occur, in a way that's informed by a use case, and then doing the hard work of finding evidence once you've started to decompose, like what can go right, what can go wrong, starting to do the work of gathering evidence. Am I getting in those very, very different circumstances where I've specified what is desired and not desired? Am I getting the behaviors I want? And then what can I do to get closer to the behavior I want across all of these different settings? But it's fundamentally to me about decomposing and building rubrics
Mm.
that are decomposed for different priorities, different policies, but also different contexts and different kinds of behaviors. And working backwards from there. So like you start by decomposing and finding very, very small sample size evidence. That's the very manual work. It sometimes gets called red teaming. We can get into a
Yeah.
longer discussion of red teaming if you're
No, but I think what we're getting at here is something. It seems like I always a lot of people talk about the why on my podcast as well. We need to get the
yeah,
why we want to do things, why we want to make the change in the organization before we start with the technology. So to some extent, what you're doing here is just you're going down a level, right? You're going closer to asking the why in every single scenario the model is performing something. So
yeah,
what's the purpose? What you want to do? So and that's I've said that on previous episode that the demand or the why is sort of a fractal. It just keeps expanding and going small in everything in AI here, right? And in the end, there's always a human.
yeah,
Sorry, people are like, so people expect everything to be tech, but there's always a human in the end of it, right? And
yeah,
to some extent, that's just what you're saying. You're just going very narrowly down into the everything you want to do. Every evaluation is that desirable, the desirable word. Asking that for everything.
yeah,
That's just a fractal of the big why, isn't it?
yeah. I would say there's a need for new habits
Mm.
when it comes to doing generative AI evaluation for orgs that are starting out? That's a question that's on my mind, honestly, and I'm curious to hear like your thoughts on this. Which is, like you can think of it like a cold start problem. If you've never done generative AI evaluation, you've just started thinking about building products. Where do you start? It's one thing to have been doing generative AI for 5 years, or 7 years, like however long, like the players that have been doing this for the longest have been, and to have had the time to build as an organization the muscle memory around how do I make decisions about
Mm.
what is good enough, but also like what changes do I want to put in place when I'm deploying these products. Like you haven't built that muscle memory. Where do you start? Is really really challenging.
Well,
I'm curious to
for
hear like what
me,
you notice,
yeah,
and what you what you think of approaches to that problem.
for me, it becomes a human in the loop question all the time, and that
Mm,
obviously doesn't work when you put it into software. Software also has other problems. So, when you're a software vendor and you add it, you just have an uncontrollable cost on it. You have a baseline
yeah.
cost B, and then suddenly you have this model. You don't know tokens. How do I control the token
Yep.
consumption, right? But that's another problem. But I think that the human in the loop thing is what we're advising everywhere right now. Have it work like a bunch of interns, right? Build teams of interns with generative AI agents,
Mm,
and have someone control what comes out in the end. Obviously,
mm,
because you don't necessarily know. So you use it on in areas where you don't have any light right now. I usually say dark rooms. You have things that
mm,
are done quite neatly today with transactional systems, but then you also have some areas that you can't do with these systems that you already have, and you could do it if you sat down as a human and went through it. But maybe we
yep.
could add AI to give us some light in these areas that are more than the complete darkness we have today. So it's very much about accepting the this unpredictability, this lack of evaluation. And if you accept that, you can sort of assume what you can use it for. That's what I'm in every presentation I do. I always present all of these things it does very wrong, the technology,
Yep.
because that means that they can sort of see, okay, that means I shouldn't use it for this, but I can maybe use it here instead. So trying to balance those two, right? Again, it's a balance of risk and innovation.
Yep. Yep.
Is that a good enough answer? I think it's a terrible answer for software vendors, right? But it's always everyone's always putting this, just like the Chat GPT, disclaimer at the bottom. This is just a preview in the beginning, and now it says it can make mistakes. Putting that everywhere. This can make a mistake.
You know,
Mm.
that's a mindset I wish, I don't know. I have mixed feelings on this, but I think about safety engineering a lot. So
Yeah,
it's very old field. To me, a lot of risk management practices like definitely have parallels in safety engineering, and the safety engineering world has been doing this for like almost
mm.
100 years at this point. So how do you prevent plane crashes? How do you prevent um, you know um, nuclear power plants from going wrong? How do you
Yeah. Don't
prevent
put a Gen AI
road
to fly your plane, please. Don't put ChatGPT to do that right now.
Yeah, what I was gonna say is there's this example, you know, from Sydney Decker, AI safety, sorry, not AI safety, safety engineering researcher, that I find very interesting on this specific idea. So, like you mentioned, like what's the point where you need to rely on users to achieve the kind of outcomes that they want and to prevent the kind of outcomes they might not want and that might be like harmful. Um, and the example is a traffic safety engineer in the Netherlands, Hans Monderman, in the early 2000s, was tasked with reducing traffic jams and accidents in a small city in the Netherlands. And there's streets that had mixed use. They were used by cars, pedestrians, bikes. And the solution they came up with at the time was to just take everything out. So no traffic signs, no traffic lights, no road markings, no lines, no sidewalks, no zebra crossings, no safe pedestrian zones, no speed limits, nothing, right? Take it all out. Um, and it turns out that in that specific situation, which is not necessarily generalizable, I'm not going to say like this is always what you want on the roads, far from it. But in that specific situation, taking the trappings of
Mm.
safe roads out and the expectation of like what is a safe road? Well, it's a road that has all of these rules, all of these like crosswalks and so on and so forth, right? Taking all of those things out in that scenario had demonstrably beneficial outcomes. So like fewer traffic jams, fewer accidents, and so on and so forth. And the question is, why is that ever useful? Um, and the points that Decker makes is thinking of it in terms of um, the place of participants in enacting safe outcomes. And what is the place of people in the situation and of their like situational awareness of their human judgment in enacting different kinds of outcomes. And yeah, it's a known thing that safeguards that can decrease risk for participants can also somehow decrease the skills, the awareness, the efforts, the
Mm.
habits they rely on in in staying safe. And so there is this like subtle dynamic between expectations around, what do you have responsibility for? What do you have ownership of? And the things that you bring, thought, agency, and contextual awareness to, and that's a dynamic that I think is at work with generative AI to some extent. I'm not going to say like, take all the traffic lights out is the solution for generative AI.
No,
Far
no,
from
no,
it.
no, no, definitely.
And I think Air Canada should be liable for the things that its customer service chatbot says, and if it says false things, that's not on the user at all. That's on
Yeah.
Air Canada. And I mean, right? At least like let the courts
So
decide.
somehow,
But
some kind of, we're all controllers, giving us back the this ability. When we automate, we've always been saying for years, right? Also with the previous automation waves, that we want people to stop typing and start being controllers instead, to some extent, right? We want people to control things. But I think I spoke to one of my professors, and I don't know if I mentioned this on one of the other episodes as well, but I spoke to an old professor at the university who said that going to reviewing instead of just accepting, that's a 100-fold increase in your mental power usage, right? It's much more
mhm,
complex to. So if we right now we sort of accept things because when you drive on a road, there's a safe space and there's a bicycle, and you just think, okay, I'm safe, I don't have to think. But
yep.
then suddenly when you have to be aware all the time, you're always like this little scared bunny in the traffic, right? And do we really want to everyone to be that all the time? Is that utopia? Is that AI utopia? We're all, afraid that things are fake and false. You know, everyone's going around like, "Is this really a message from you? Is it a scam?" I don't.
No,
Are you my wife or are you a bot? I don't want that kind of world, right? Do you know?
I have lots of thoughts on this. I love this question.
Yeah.
um, so one direction we could go with this is to talk about bias. Actually,
Hmm.
there's rightly tons of discussions of bias in AI. And when thinking about bias, oftentimes what people mean in the AI space, I mean, is specifically race and gender bias. It's also more generally, I would say, wrongful bias. So it's like, it's not just that there is, so like, what is bias? To me, bias comes down to taking shortcuts, in making decisions based on
Hmm.
information. Um, you know, Bias is
That's
to,
a great definition.
yeah. So so just like taking shortcuts is something we do, all the time in making decisions based on information. And to take a shortcut means you're not going exactly where the evidence is pointing you. You're instead relying, either on where you've gone in the past, or on heuristics, or on habits, or on patterns to get you to a decision instead of like relying on information. And the thing about cognitive shortcuts like this is that they're central to how agents with limited information make decisions.
Mm.
If you have limited cognitive power, you have limited time, and you need to make decisions. Shortcuts become central to decision making in all sorts of setting, and it's part of how I would say animals with limited information function, that they take shortcuts. And then the question is, when are those
Instinctively, yeah.
shortcuts, yeah, when are those shortcuts wrongful, is the important question. When are they, when do they need to be corrected? When do we need to avoid them, right? And the connection to like the question we were just like, so it's like there's a place for habits, in making decisions. There's a place for, not like relying on critical thinking. The question is always, when is that going to lead us astray, and when do we need correctives? But it's not a straightforward thing, to figure out like where are those areas where we need to rely on habits or not rely on habits. It's never a straightforward thing. And I really take the points that, this kind of like magical like default of, well, you should always rely on very slow critical thinking, and that's the approach you need in every circumstance. It's just not going to work.
No, but the point is, if we free up so much time by using AI, and we end up spending more than that time on evaluating and being critical all the time, have we even gained anything? Just like when I said, we had this symbolic AI where we trained and trained and trained it. You set up the rules all the time.
Yeah,
But so now we've made a shortcut. We made the neural networks that train themselves, but now we have to spend the exact same amount of effort that we used to do on building symbolic AIs on
yeah,
controlling
yeah,
the self-trained models, right? So
yeah.
there's something here, right? So now we get a lot of free time, so we can control and be nervous about if you're communicating with an AI. Is that
Yeah.
is that putting it on the edge, or is that fully a fair assumption or a way of putting it?
There's very interesting 90s scholarship on auditing that raises this exact question. Michael Power, social scientist who also worked as an auditor before doing social science of audits
Mhm.
back in the 90s. And we're talking about audits in the AI space all the time, so it's always interesting to have this in mind to me. And um, one of the observations that he makes about the auditing space in the 90s is that, you know, and that's a proposal that I think is definitely not unhelpful. There's this tension between trust and verification. And that's a fundamental feature of, to me,
Is that
human
the third
relations.
tension you've mentioned today, isn't it? I
It's
think it
lots of
is.
tensions. I love these things. Uh, but like, to me, trust is fundamental to the way organizations work, to the way that
Yeah.
human relationships work, to the way friendship works. And having doubts about relationship, or like whether there's a threat, whether there's a conflict, is also central. And the way that power is framed, like what's happening with audits is that audits are a very prominent way governments currently approach this question of how do we enact the right kind of verifications in situation where trust is desired and needed. And thinking of it like there's a need for trust for institutions to function, for organizations to function, for relationships to function, and there's also a need for verification. You can't get trust without having this like process that enables you to ask, wait, is that
Mm.
trust deserved? Has the trust been broken? Does it need to be repaired?
Yeah.
And if you can't ask questions about what goes wrong and so on and so forth, if you don't have verification, you also don't have trust. um,
And
and
that's the problem with the social media, isn't it, today, isn't it? And politics, and or we can this could really extrapolate to everything.
I, go for it.
No,
What's
no,
on your mind with social media?
but no, what I mean is, people seeing, they don't trust what they get from the media, and they get something, they feel like everything on SoMe is not you cannot verify it because no one's verifying if this is true or not, and then they
Yeah,
sort of trying to start to take that way of looking at information and put that to, newspapers and TVs, everything becomes a questionable information, something that
yeah,
they can't trust, and then suddenly you don't have any trust. And if you don't have any trust, you don't have any stability. If you don't have any stability, you don't have a society. Ta-da!
yeah,
There we
yeah,
died, So we
yeah,
killed the world because we can't trust anything. No one's verifying. That's what I've been saying. Media is not just about, it's not just the technology that you're communicating through, but it's about having something that's mediated by someone. And I want to get back to that. And I actually hope that this whole Gen AI crazy thing is going to lead us to a reactionary response that says we need mediated information again because we can't
yeah,
trust anything. That's my hope. I don't think, I don't know if that's going to happen, but I really sincerely hope that that's
yeah.
what's going to happen. I don't see my
There's
kids opening up newspapers though. I see them looking on SoMe still, right, for information. So
Yeah,
I don't think it's gonna happen. But no,
yeah. There's a related way to like frame this. I love this, like, yeah, the analogy you're drawing with so what happens to um I would say, like, to democracy specifically, where like where like part of how democracies work is you need an informed public,
yeah,
and you
an
need a
auditor,
public that is in a
an informed
position to,
auditing public. Yeah, mm,
I mean, yeah, or at least like a public that can perform that function of being a check on
yeah,
governments, and information plays a key role. That's why, like, in like conceptions of you know at least like the last couple of centuries of thinking about democracy, the fourth estate, the place of journalism, the place of trusted information sources that can enable, voters to understand what is happening, to have visibility into decisions that get made, to have visibility into what goes wrong is so important. Um, Important to human rights, to freedom of the press freedom of the press is really central to democracy. And you're totally right to say that when trust in information sources is at stake, there's like a fundamental threat to whether you can have well-functioning democracies. There's a related question for me in social media, and I think you're totally right to like make that analogy with generative AI, which is what happens when technology changes the relationship people have to trusted information sources. And I 100% take the point that having trusted institutions like media sources that have reputation, that vet their journalists, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth is,
And they also
an
say, "Hey,
approach that's
I'm a
worked
right
in the
wing
past.
newspaper.
Yeah,
I'm a left
yeah,
wing. Okay, you know that
yeah.
sort of. They
It's
sort of tell that.
yeah, it's an approach that's worked in the past. I would say, and this is highly, highly debatable. I would say that, and this might be wrong, the problems we see with trust and information, for me in the US, is at least date back to traditional media. I think of, the kind of conservative radio that emerged in the 80s and 90s, and then eventually Fox News, as a major part of still what is happening to the current information ecosystem, and a major part of what's eroded trust in journalistic institutions. And there's actually work that's looking at social media specifically, asking the question, is it traditional information sources that's leading to disinformation, or is it social media? And a finding in a lot of, I'm not going to like make a generalization. This is, like hot topic of study, and
Hmm.
it's an ongoing, area of investigation, but like pinpointing what is this information due to traditional media misbehaving and spewing out false information in ways that are obvious and probably to some extent deliberate, but because it's expedient, convenient, helps achieve your goal. What's the place of elected officials spewing out misinformation in the this information ecosystem? And then what is the place of social media? And there is work that like designing studies like this, that to some extent finds that traditional information sources are where the problem is. I'm
Hmm.
not going to say that none of the problem lies in social media, but it's important to recognize that there's an erosion of trust in information sources, both from elected officials, but also from
And
news
then there's
sources, that is
obviously.
native to traditional media, actually. And that dynamic of traditional media going, as it were, off the rails or undermining the credibility of traditional media is also a dynamic that is part of traditional media to me. And having said that, my mindset when it comes to what technology does and technology that changes how people consume information is, um, there's always going to be this instability in what are the trusted information
Yeah.
sources and do they function as they should. There's always going to be this instability. And the question is, what new forms of stability can emerge and should be pursued, right? And I don't know what that looks like. I don't have a magic ball, but I do feel
Because it's not
optimistic
black
that
or
we can
white,
figure it
right?
out.
It's because
What's
it's
that?
not black or white. The truth is not black and
Yeah,
white, and it's just
yeah,
about finding a pragmatic public square that we can discuss in, where we say we all agree this is the boundaries of our discussion, right? And when someone
yeah,
steps outside of that, then suddenly it all erodes, and then we don't have trust in anything, and then
yeah,
technology becomes a problem because then you have so me spreading anything, and antagonism just keeps growing. And
yeah,
society doesn't need antagonism. It's not a football match, right?
yeah,
It's something where we trust each other, as you just said, right? It's
yeah,
And then suddenly people start looking for a strong man again, and you go, Thomas Hobbes, oh, it's a crazy world. I don't care about craziness. I just want someone strong to tell me what to do, and I don't care.
yeah.
It, anyway, but that's a completely different discussion, obviously from the AI, but it's also related to this because now we have, obviously, AI is just the gun. It's not the man wielding the gun, but you can. it just gives the possibility right now, this generative AI, to create anything that's a falsehood and make it look even more true, and it doesn't help with trust. I think that's my fear.
The flip side is there's work, including by journalists. So right now I have a grant from the Brown Institute for Media Innovation, which is funding projects that are of relevance to journalism. It is really at the intersection of tech and journalism and public information. And some of my fellow grantees are working exactly on this. It's like, how can you use generative AI to help journalists do their work? How can you use generative AI to help dig through? I mean, there's so much text data that needs to be understood, digested in the public interest. People are working on this actually, and I definitely take the point, and I take that extremely seriously. I agree with you 100% that the way that generative AI can supercharge disinformation campaigns is a major threat. That is like, it is one of the big threats that generative AI poses.
It can also
At the
flip,
same
right? It can also flip, yes.
Yeah. So generative AI gives us new ways of interfacing with text data in very large amounts, and that can include generating deceptive text data. That can also include finding new and, over time, hopefully, I mean, that's a process. We're not there, right? But trusted ways to interface with text data in ways we couldn't in the past, and for sure that is going to create threat opportunities for bad actors. But I also think that it creates opportunities for good actors.
But also
It's an
maybe give that the tipping point for us to say, okay, now it's enough with this or that. If it becomes too much, there's this, sometimes there's reactions that we didn't expect, right? In Europe, Brexit led to a left-wing surge in most of the rest of Europe, right? Because no one wanted to do a Brexit, and now we had the right-wing surge in a lot of countries, the old countries in Europe. But then we suddenly had a left-wing surge in the new countries in the Eastern Europe, and people don't see, these reactions. They're dynamic, right? And they react to things as well. That's always the thing in a revolution. There's a reactionary tendency just after, Napoleon came as a more reactive king, basically, than the old king, more autocratic, but he was a child of the revolution. So I'm always saying, maybe this revolution in how anyone can generate anything that's fake means that we will not care about anything. We will start caring about the things that are tangible instead, right? Instead of digitally created. Who knows, right? The fatigue, right? I've not met anyone yet who loves AI generated content. When they can see it, feel it, right? Not really. I think it's fun to make songs, right? Suno, but I don't love it.
That's a great observation and question. What might it look like? I mean, there's an example generated content that I love from friend Eric Salvaggio, artist, who uses, and you can think of it like artistic hacking, like investigates ways in which generative AI models fail and uses that as a central feature of his art. And he has this.
That's also a meta layer to it, isn't it?
Yeah, he has this video piece called Sensual Noise, and what the piece is about is he realized he was investigating text-to-image models, and he realized that some text-to-image models had safety filters that were triggered by the words, but even if there's nothing in the image that is actually not safe for work. So he realized that words like sensual would get the model's safety filter to blur out parts of the image, even if you're asking the model to generate noise. And so the piece is like, these images of noise, it's just like specks of color and, in different patterns, but it's like completely abstract patterns. But then the model is looking for things it can blur out because it's being triggered by the words, and it's automatically like looking for things it can blur out.
That's
and
fun.
Of course, then if you have a model that's like trained on images of explicit content, and then it's looking for patterns that are similar in
something
noise,
that doesn't have it.
it's going to
funny.
find patterns. It's going to find things to blur
It's
out.
like a teenager that can see anything as naughty, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think of that as tremendous generative AI art, actually, and far from the only one. There's another project called Loeb. It's like Steph Maj Swanson, um, built this character that had you know um, tremendous impact on social media, but based again on it's like creative prompting, and realizing that I forget exactly what the approach was, but like again like learning and engaging deeply with ways in which text to image models misbehave, and
So, but
um,
but what you're saying here, what you like about it is meta content, right? It's content about content creating in generative AI. It's not really content that's been produced with it. Looking at a LinkedIn post where you can clearly see it says, "Let's delve into," and then it has these bullets where it has a title for each bullet, and then the content of the bullet, and you can just see it's AI generated. I don't like those posts. I'm so annoyed at them. Do you love those things, right? Are you saying you like things that
right.
talk about generative AI can generate, and then you can it becomes meta. You're just taking a layer out, right? And then I get, okay, that's fun, but that's a techie thing almost, right? It's not really content. It's not like a children's book you're reading to your kids, right? That's AI generated.
Yeah,
Do you know what I'm getting at here?
I have very strong feelings on this question that come from just different parts of my life. I really enjoy generative art in other domains that doesn't have to do with AI. And I think that practices that rely on giving up control and then like looking for ways to make decisions in situation where the
Mm,
artist lacks control is like fundamentally very interesting. And so to me, actually, generative AI brings new opportunities for artists to like investigate like what can
yeah.
happen when you're like making artistic decisions in a situation where you lack control. There's all sorts of other things that I think might be enabled. But it feels to me like what you're describing maybe has more to do with the fact that images where we can go, this is obviously generated, or like text where we can go, this is obviously not written by a human. Maybe it's just not very good. And in a way, I think of that problem as potentially having a very short lifespan, and it's maybe more similar to when I
Mm,
think of like 80s music. I mean, those things were amazing, but so like digital reverbs, the first generation of digital reverbs were amazing tools, and completely overused, and they were very, very crunchy, had tons of flaws. And, you listen back to a lot of, like late 70s and early 80s music, and all you can hear is um, people abusing this like early generation of digital reverbs. And that's literally all you can hear. And that's, to
but
my
I
ears
I
now,
still
that's
think
sometimes
that
desired,
T-Pain
but
is
that's sometimes
using
annoying.
autotune the way he should do. You're right. That's
Right, right. So there's definitely that thing where you know that moment where with an early technology that gets used to make art, you get that moment of like uncanny valley where it's just very, very, very
mm,
obviously wrong. um but I think of that as temporary always, and in a way, like the question of are we going to get to art that actually fools you, as
yeah,
very,
yeah,
very
we
short
will.
lived. We're going to get there very soon. We probably
Yeah,
already
yeah,
are there.
yeah.
um and in a way, I think of that as a it's not, to me, it's not one of the really like important questions, because we are going to get to art that fools people, no problem. And there's other like tons of other questions that need to be raised about generative AI art, including how do we build a world in which artists don't feel like their work is being stolen and are incentivized to
Mm.
keep doing to keep doing incredible work and to share it with the world. And how do we create conditions where content creators are still, incentivized to release their work? How do
Yeah, yeah,
we
because
create
as
conditions where
I've said before, an AI model would not have created cubism, right? We need someone to still want to make things. We need to have this tangibility back in things. Oh, I sound so conservative. I don't know where that came from, but to some extent, I just think for content at least, or for I hope there will be a stop for this TikTok consuming and then Gen AI everything, right? A little bit,
no.
just a little bit. But Bo, I have one more question I need to ask you, right? Because Elon Musk keeps on saying that, and it keeps on moving, I think. But will we have AGI in a year? This is a terrible question. I know you're gonna hate this one. That's why I'm asking you.
um I have a preprint that's been released. that I would say makes the case that this is an ill-formed question. It turns out that yeah. So to me, and this goes back to what I said earlier about intelligence, to me, AGI is it's not a well-defined concept. What AGI is, and it's actually worth investigating. It's very interesting to read through.
Let's
work
call it
that is trying to
foundational intelligence
conceptualize, yeah.
then in this conversation.
Yeah,
Foundational
no, I want to.
intelligence.
Yeah, like no need to like change the description, but to me, like AGI is actually debates. They're very contested. It's a bunch of extremely contested opinions about forms of machine intelligence we don't have yet, and attempts at specifying what could they look like, such that we can say, well, now we have it, right? And there's that desire to be able to like specify, like, well, now we have it. That's driving a lot of these conversations. But if you go back to the mindset that fundamentally this question is about specifying what is desirable, so policies plus descriptions and implementation of like how do we evaluate like whether we're getting the behavior that is desired, and that is what we're talking about, and we're talking about it for forms of machine intelligence that don't yet exist. To me, those are the two features. I guess a third feature that I think is interesting, I actually like, that's something that I like about the AGI conversation, even though like on the whole I'm more on the slightly critical side. But I really do like what I think of as biomimicry, which is, let's look at what happens in the biological domain and ask questions about what insights can we draw in building things. You can do that in architecture, you can do that in engineering, you can do that in all sorts of fields. And I think fundamentally the impulse of drawing inspiration from the biological domain in building things is a good one. The part of AGI discourse where I'm personally less excited is when you get to trying to create hierarchies, saying, more or less, here's a continuum on which we can say these things are more intelligent than those. In the human case, these kinds of distinctions can be used for eugenics. Hierarchies of intelligence are really harmful in the purely human case. I'm similarly, I just think of anytime you try to build a hierarchy of intelligence, that is an extraordinarily high risk activity.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you should never ever do it. There might be circumstances, for instance, where it helps. You can use IQ tests to
but it's a Hollywood genre
screen
thing,
diseases,
right?
for instance, you can use like intelligence tests to screen dementia. That's okay by me,
this
right?
is what I say. This is like a Hollywood genre thing
Hollywood
again,
genre,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the super intelligence, and it's more intelligent than me, so it will kill me. It makes making a hierarchy, eugenics, right? People are thinking that way.
I'm not going to say it's all eugenics. I actually think in a way that's like, I know some critics do say that is like the very widespread view that all AGI is eugenics. I think hierarchies of intelligence are damaging, often because they're eugenics, sometimes for other reasons. And they're very high risk. And so the part of AGI discourse that's in the business of saying, humans will be outsmarted. And oh, by the way, what humans? So, there's views on which you have to think of like an individual, like a single, like quote unquote, like average intelligence human. There's views on which, no, you actually think of the collective intelligence of all of humanity. When will that be outsmarted, and so on and so forth? Like, I'm just not interested in those hierarchies. I also think of them as extremely high risk. So I'm generally on the side of, of all things, making claims about hierarchies of intelligence is something that should be avoided in most settings. I'm very, very, very risk averse when it comes to making that style of claims. And I think the thresholds for like what kind of evidence is needed to make claims like that is extraordinarily high. The science is just not there. So.
No, but I actually like the way you're advocating for a more, naturalistic AI, or something more mimicking life, or mimicking, going deeper into something instead of just going hierarchical, bigger, and saying this is better, but saying maybe this is more. Are you saying that maybe we should go in a direction where we say this AI is more fit for purpose, instead of saying this instead of saying this AI is better than the other AIs and all the other intelligences in the world? Is that
I've mentioned the preprint that's out. That preprint comes out of a longer project with a bigger group that is still happening, and we're still writing the paper. But actually, like, fit for purpose is literally language that was in early drafts of the other paper that's not released.
Oh, see, I'm a good AI model. I just take inference. I can hear everything you said today.
Use that language. we're debating whether we want to stick to that language. I think we might move to a different language, but it's the same kind of question. It's like it's about AI that achieves the goals we want, but also imagining forms of machine intelligence that don't yet exist and that achieve desirable goals. And then the question of for whom, whose goals, always, right? And investigating that territory while drawing inspiration from intelligence in other domains, is
Yeah,
yeah,
instead of
that's not
going
a bad thing.
sci-fi
Yeah.
better, this is the best AI in the world, right? That's a weird, almost evil. It's on the other hand, I think it's a very Elon Musk thing to say. I'm not saying it's evil, but it's very, I want to die on Mars. I want to have the best AI, but maybe that's just a thing you will never have. Maybe that hierarchy doesn't exist, except if you make it politically, you will make something that's evil, high risk, as you said, right? But Bo, this conversation could go on forever. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm super happy to have had you on the podcast today. Really, I think there's so much awesome content and considerations here. I hope people can follow along because it's also the licks is quite high at times. but I need to go to the final question here, which I've been really looking forward to hearing from you. And this is the centerpiece of the podcast. So are you ready for that one?
Let's go.
So, Borhane, what is the only constant?
The only constant is the tension between the fact that humans have very little knowledge, very little power, and we can also always strive to go beyond the little knowledge we have, the little power we have. So I think of science as the effort to, in an evidence-based way, try to like acquire more knowledge of how the world works, and in ways that can be shared, and in ways that can be verified by others. And one of the amazing things about science is, like starting from the fact that we have so little evidence, we can get to a place where we build um, you know, collective knowledge of different phenomena we're interested in a way that's verifiable by others. And that process to me starts from, grappling and being frustrated by how little we know, grappling with the uncertainty we have, and grappling with how little we can do about it, and overcoming those limitations. So, like, to me, humans are creatures that are incredibly limited and that constantly struggle to overcome their limitations. And when humans do that together, that's a constant that I'm just always excited about. It's another way to put it, maybe, is humans grappling with problems that bother them and that they want to see solved. We always, to me, humans always have like very limited ability to solve the problems they care about, and yet amazing things happen when we try. And that's a constant that I'm just deeply excited about. I won't say it's the only constant, but it's one that I'm always interested in.
That's a really great answer and a very optimistic one for the future that we will overcome. We shall overcome. That's a song too, isn't it? Maybe I'll make that the outro to this episode. No. But, Bo, thank you so much for being on The Only Constant. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure for me too.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.